Well, let's see. Today we're going to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the Mosher Drew firm, and two of its principals are here today to talk about it, the past and the future. It was founded by Robert Mosher and Roy Drew in 1948, and it was one of the early firms that's still in business in San Diego today. Roy, who actually I knew his family when I was growing up, died in 2004, and Bob Mosher died in 2015. And he has been a speaker here before at the Friends of San Diego Architecture, and would like to give talks and presentations on his time as an architect. And he's most famous, of course, for being involved in the Coronado Bridge in the 1960s. Let's see, Larry Hoeksema is going to be talking about the legacy of the firm. He joined it in 1979 and is the principal and owner. And he's also past president of the San Diego Architecture Foundation and past president of the AIA San Diego, and also on the advisory council of the San Diego Youth Symphony and Conservatory. Bill Magnuson, who's going to talk about principles of the firm, has been a practicing architect for 34 years and been with it since 1991. And he is, among his many aspects of his work at the firm, is mentoring the next generation of leaders. And he's going to talk about the firm's future projects as well as some of its guiding principles. So first we're going to go back in time to Larry. He's going to talk about the early years of the firm and all the interesting projects that it's been responsible for ever since. So welcome, Larry.
Got it. Good here, Roger. Hopefully so. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I'm going to pass this on to I want to thank the Friends very much. First of all, Catherine and others who are involved with this organization. It's been our pleasure to be involved with the organization in the past, and we're really looking forward to sharing with you today some of the history of Architects Mosher Drew. Again, I want to thank you for this opportunity. I'm not sure that I'm going to be around here in another 70 years to tell you more about if the firm is still in business, trusting it will be. But it's been a tremendous history and a tremendous opportunity to be a part of this firm over many years here in San Diego. I wanted to start out just very briefly. By the way, all the images you're going to see here are projects that Mosher Drew has done over the past, and I'm going to go back and we'll talk about the bridge in a few minutes and also home savings. I want to keep this as brief as I can. I'm not going to try to go too fast, but I know Bill's got some very important things he wants to share with you as well. But I wanted to start out with this quote from Bernard Maybach: "Architecture is the handwriting of man." If you look at handwriting today, we don't talk a lot about that. Our kids don't take that in school anymore. Now our grandchildren don't take that in school anymore. But handwriting is a very personal thing, expressive of who we are. Signatures, the importance of those, indicating our own personages in that is very, very important. So I just wanted to start out with that by saying I think Bob Mosher and Roy Drew, in establishing their firm, were very sensitive to the people, the clients, the relationships they established over many years. And as Roger had indicated, Robert Mosher and Roy Drew, this is a photograph in their office in probably 1948, 1949. The image on the right is actually 1262 and a half Prospect Street, which is still in, this building still exists in La Jolla on Prospect Street. Robert Mosher's parents, Alice and Jack, bought this property, the Green Dragon Colony, in 1944 for $50,000. And Robert, one of the first things that he did when he came back to San Diego after working in Los Angeles, where he first met Roy in 1946, came to this, did some measured drawings, and then started actually doing work on this property. This is just a photograph of the stair going up to the office, the entry door to the office. By the way, these photographs were published, if I have this correct, these were published in an article in Sunset Magazine back in the late 1940s, early 1950s. I'm sorry, I don't know who the photographer was. I'm not going to say that yet, but there's some other photographs I'll go into more detail. But the entrance to the office, and also you can see the Ames molded plywood chairs that are in there of that time. So the vinyl flooring, probably filled with asbestos, but nonetheless, it was a wonderful space which still exists today, and a great space to start the office. The early years of Mosher Drew, and I've gone back and looked at this, I think Robert Mosher did probably about 18 private residences, Roy did about 9. This is one of Robert Mosher's. This is the Borcher residence that he did in the early 1950s, just a couple photographs of that. This is a pool house and garden pavilion that Robert Mosher did for the Carters, Armstead Carter. Most of these early projects were done in La Jolla, some in Point Loma. This one in particular, only 2 photographs I'm going to show, there's other ones, but this is the Clouseau Residence, which is on McCall Street in Point Loma. This one led very early in their career to Robert Mosher spending 2 years in New York. He was an editor in House Beautiful magazine. And long story behind how it came to this, but this Clouseau residence he did for Herbert and Minerva Kunzel in Point Loma. I think he was a corporate attorney for Solar. Caught the eye of Elizabeth Gordon, who was the editor of House Beautiful magazine, and it ended up he was with a 2-year stint as an editor. During that period of time, he spent several weeks at Taliesin with Frank Lloyd Wright, an experience he loved to talk about. The home on the left is the Rohr residence. The Rohrs were people, obviously, with the Rohr Industries in South Bay. One of the members of that family had contracted polio, and where it wasn't an iron lung. And the portion of that home you see on the lower right, that home was designed by Roy Drew in the, I'm not sure if I have this right, La Playa area of Point Loma, close to the water you see here, such that the person in the iron lung had a view of the entrance to San Diego Bay. You could see the ships coming and going. So the sensitivity to the clients, their individual, very specific needs. And this is something that Bill's going to talk on in just a few moments. There was a sign in the drafting room in the office that talked about, we believe that the environment should reflect the warmth and unique quality of the human spirit. Bill's going to talk about the humanism, the principles that Roy and Drew really lived by and practiced in their architecture. And I wanted to share this with you. This is very briefly. These are more recent photographs. But in the lower left-hand photograph is the roof. You catch the roof of the office building. Mosher Drew was in that first office building for 10 years, for the next one for about 26. This is the view that we had. I was there for 5 years, looking over towards the Marine Room in La Jolla Shores, and of course that's the Cove in La Jolla. That was the other view that we had. So taking breaks, that was a very nice time, looking out the windows. Late 1950s, we began work, the firm began work on the Bishop School in La Jolla. Roy did a lot of the early work there. In fact, it was really Roy's client throughout the course. And even into the early 1980s, after I'd been with the firm for a few years, we continued to do work at Bishop School. Roy was a big fan of Irving Gill and the work that Irving Gill had done in La Jolla many years before. And with Carlton Winslow, who had done work on the campus, and Irving Gill, it was a wonderful client of theirs. Also, during the time that Robert was out in New York, Roy continued to work and lead the office in La Jolla in that. One of the early clients was James and Helen Copley. Copley Press in La Jolla, early 1950s. The building on the left is much more recent. That was their private library in La Jolla. And it was a library where James Copley, coming out of the industry, the Copley Press and that, had collected papers, a rare collection of papers in that, including some of Abraham Lincoln, that were stored in this library. And I don't know this, and I can't remember the interior designer of this, but I believe in more recent years, the interior of this building, it was done in the mid-1980s, has been completely gutted, and all of this was taken away. The building on the left is the Bank of La Jolla. Some of the early works there, those came in the late 1960s, early 1970s. You see the 2 branch banks, San Diego Trust and Savings on the top, San Diego Federal Savings and Loan. You may be familiar with the lower one, the branch bank with the blue tile roofs. You continue to see those, although not San Diego Federal Savings and Loan. You may see them as 99-cent stores and other places around San Diego. But that was Roy's client, and also San Diego Trust and Savings working with the Sefton family. And the Bank of La Jolla, which is at the end of Wall Street, is still there today. And Bob Mosher would want to remind you that that large doghouse on the top was not a part of his work. So when you see that building in La Jolla, that was not there when he first did the building. And obviously, what began as La Jolla Arts Center, they began work there in the late 1950s, and that was a client that they continued working with, late 50s, 60s, 70s, and into the early 80s, before the firm moved down to Point Loma. And obviously controversy today, for any of you that are reading architecture publications, a lot of controversy about the removal of the work that Robert Venturi has done there in more recent years, about that being removed or not a part of the addition that Annabelle Seldorf is going to be doing. But a client of the firm that was very, very close to Robert and very much involved with that over many years. A project you may not know about in the early 1970s, laboratory and conference room. This is within the Salk Institute. This is for Dr. Roger Gilman. Dr. Gilman at that time he was one of the early neurobiologists in that. I think he's 94 years old today, and he went on to win a Nobel Prize several years after this laboratory was done for his work at Salk. And I bring this more recent project in La Jolla up. Lower right-hand corner is the Florence Fir'D Library that was done in the early 1980s, and the subsequent addition, the Joan and Irwin Jacobs Annex Foundation that was done in the early 2000s. And Anna, I see you in the front row here in that. I have to tell you, that was an amazing opportunity to add on to the Fir'D Library, extremely constrained site in La Jolla, but to be able to put a 3-story addition, and that is 3 stories, lower level that was tied into the Fir'D Library, then an upper level, very challenging, and we're very, very proud of that work. I think it came off extremely well, and our own children going to school there, I know, spent many hours in the library. Speaking of libraries, the West Wing, the Fine Arts Gallery, done in the early 1960s. The upper right-hand corner is the Asian Court. There's a model in the lower right-hand corner. Again, some controversy. Buildings from the 1950 Balboa Park exhibition and that were taken down in the place of this, but again, a project that Robert was very, very proud of, the concrete work. This project was being built, designed and built at the same time the Timken. And Robert was always very proud of this, that this building went up for $30 a square foot. The Timken was $100 a square foot at the time, so we have to keep that in mind. And I bring in these projects just to contrast. This was work that Robert had done at a very, very similar period of time. Central Federal Savings, Home Savings, more recently NBC Tower, now without any, I think, branding on the top of it, down in Horton Plaza. And the building on the left was a 4-building complex, very marvelous scale for any of you that may have been out there. I know the M.H. Golden had their offices there, general contractor. The zoo has had offices there over a period of time. You see the sculpture in the middle of the court, the trees, wonderful scale to this complex out at the intersection of 8 and 163 in Mission Valley. A quiet place in the midst of a lot of activity, but a contrasting of this environment to the urban environment, the 23-story Central Federal Tower, which, by the way, was the first project, the cornerstone of the Horton redevelopment area in 1972. It was a design-build project with M.H. Golden in our office. University of California, San Diego, Robert began his association there in 1960 when the university was just opening. The project on the right, married student housing up at the top of La Jolla Shores. Roger Revelle called Robert up there. It was, by the way, that site with the married student housing one, it was a dump site for the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. All their old equipment, you can't imagine what was up there. The eucalyptus trees, which Roger said, save every one. But the dump site was going to go away, and that's where they built the married student housing in the early 1960s. The project on the left is an art gallery built in you see the struts coming down there. That was a World War II, probably a temporary building as they used to call them. This was done in 1965, and shortly thereafter, it didn't exist very long, probably within less than 5 years, that building was gone. But it won several awards locally as an art gallery in this temporary building exhibit of art up on the University of California campus. Master plan for Muir College, a very interesting story behind that, but I'm going to tell more about that later if I have a moment. But Robert Mosher was selected to do the master planning for Second College, Muir College. The original campus architect was Robert Alexander out of Los Angeles. He had done it and laid it out in an area in such a manner that Robert had said in a paper he wrote later on, he felt it was very arrogant, he felt it was very undemocratic, he felt it was very fascist in terms of the master plan for the campus. Monumental scale, 1.3 miles from north to south. Huge courtyards that could hold thousands of people, high towers. Now you see some of that here, but that done in a much more sensitive way, much more compact, much dense. In fact, it's the most dense college on the entire campus. And the work that he did, besides the master plans in the upper right-hand corner, the Applied Physics and Mathematics building, which this is an image of. cast-in-place concrete. This was being done at the same time that the Salk Institute was being done, whereas the Salk Institute was done with interstitial spaces to carry utilities between floors. These were utility towers done in a vertical sense to serve all the laboratories. And by the way, one of my favorite projects up there, certain time of day, certain time of year, Werner Yamada were the landscape architects, landforms, plant materials, vines growing up the building that you see here, and then it's just incredible in terms of how this building is aged. Which leads to this quote from Louis Sullivan: to vitalize building materials, to animate them with a thought, to charge them with social significance and value, to impart upon them the best that is in the people, such is the real function of an architect. Something that Robert and Roy truly believed in. And when you see this project at San Diego State that was done in 1964-65, Aztec Center, this, by the way, was demolished in 2011 for the new Aztec Center. And Bill and I have both worked on this project, and I have to tell you, the day this was coming down, Robert was being interviewed by Keith York at the La Jolla Historical Society, and it's on YouTube, you can see it. He gets very, very emotional in this interview telling Keith that he's just received word that this is in the process of being demolished. More recent work that Bill was in particular involved with at San Diego State, long-term client there. This is Kawikakali Student Housing and Dining. Bill and I was involved in early interviews. Bill was the project manager. This is Love Library. The Info Dome, tied in very much to the existing library on campus, but in underground for reasons of seismic concerns and that, so tied in underground, but a major project with also administrative offices on the campus. And San Diego State University, other work, Bill, this is the Confucius Institute, which is done on campus there, and just very recently, just within the last very short period of time. It's interesting, we have some Chinese friends that are involved in this facility, and we're very complimentary of that. Also familiar with the Golden Door, a client of Robert's, Deborah Seke. This work began, in part, Deborah had Rancho La Puerta, which goes back many, many years, the early 1940s, but then Golden Door more recently. When I-15 was going through to replace 395, they had to relocate from an old motel. This is what the result was. This is the Bell House on the left that I was involved with, the entry doors, the master plan, 40 units, just an absolutely incredible facility, black and whites. Now these two photographs, I believe, were taken by Julia Schulman at the time the project was open in the early 1970s, courtyards. Not just the architecture and the scale of it, but the landscaping and how the buildings were sited were just absolutely incredible. And I'll never forget the first time walking across the bridge into this. I literally got goosebumps. It was like walking into another world, just the sense of this. And by the way, if you're interested in going, there are only 40 units available per week, and they currently go for about $8,500 to $9,000 a week. That's for 6 nights. You get 4 staff per person, but what a deal. McMahon Furniture, also the mid-1970s, and I show this, I'm going to show this in comparison to the slide that follows this. The warmth of this quality that Bob has talked about, but the warmth of this is up on the, just south of Carlsbad on the lagoon. I'm not sure it's Bariquitos, but anyway, the lagoon, just south of Carlsbad. The north face is to the left, the solar screens, natural daylighting, just an incredible work environment, very small. A lot of people haven't seen or heard about it, but just to let you know that this project came from the same man as this one did, Spin Physics, done in the late 1970s. Taut, very rigid, very modern, tight skin, butt glazing. These are some of the early buildings, by the way, up in Torrey Pines Mesa. Spin Physics was an organization that was tied in with Kodak and did some of the very first magnetic recordings by an electrical engineer, Dr. Jim Lemke. This project here represents some of the work that the firm has done up at University of San Diego. I should let you know, with the Copley Residence that Roy did, with the Copley Press that Roy did, and other work over the years, this is what led to our firm currently working on the continuing to work on the University of San Diego campus. The earliest building we did on the campus, the lower right, the Copley Library. Helen Copley said, yes, she was on the board, I'll make a donation under the condition that Roy Drew will be the architect for that project. That's now led to and that was in the early 1980s. We continue to do work on that campus. The next project we did was the Hahn University Center, the upper right. And then late 1990s, early 2000, this was dedicated in 2001, the Jenny Craig Pavilion. And that came from a major gift from the Craigs. Work that came out of the Aztec Center Association with California State University System, San Marcos. We did the initial 3 buildings on that campus in the early 1990s. Subsequent work, and I have to give credit for another longtime architect in San Diego, Dick Laro, was a client of Point Loma Nazarene College at that time. Dick Laro was the one who brought us into the Point Loma Nazarene University family, and for 20 years we did work up there almost exclusively. The lower right is the Lantern, the Rotunda, and the Ryan Library. The left is the same building, and the upper right is also that same building at the juncture between the existing Ryan Library that Dick Laro had done and our firm. Fantastic client that we'd worked with. Also, military projects that we'd done over many years. William Watson was the one who was instrumental in bringing us in. This is the Administration Operations Building at 32nd Street. At the intersection where 15 hits 5 going south, you can look off and see this building off to the west. And then the campus, we did about 8 projects down there over about a 15, 17-year period on that campus, one after the other. We also did other military work up at Camp Pendleton, BEQs and training facilities. We also did justice work. We did justice work. The upper left is with the state of California, Family Foundations. The upper right is Las Colinas with the County of San Diego. The lower one is Juvenile Hall with the county. We also did master planning for the federal government in correctional facilities. Oh, and there is a slide that's missing, I thought, from here. Maybe it's coming up yet. The work over in Coronado actually began with a bridge. That was 1965, dedicated in 69. This project comes out of the mid-1980s. It was a competition that we won against 3 or 4 other competitors over there. And it won at the time the best new hotel for 300 rooms in Coronado. So we're very, very proud of that facility, which eventually led to our being involved with the city of Coronado, their police facility. Bill also worked on this, myself. This was done in about the mid-1990s. Great introduction, great relationships, which we hold to this day with some of the organizations in Coronado. And actually, this one, the Village Elementary School, preceded the police station by a few years. This was our first project under the master plan in Coronado. The Village Elementary School was done in late 1980s, dedicated in 91. Sacred Heart Parish was another project that we did over there over that period of time. And then the middle school in Coronado, which was dedicated in 2001. Very, very proud of the relationships that we've continued to keep up with members in that community. Cathedral Catholic High School, we have to give credit for the fact we won this in not a competition, in an interview in 1995. It was through the direct result of all of our work on the University of San Diego campus. Tremendous relationship with the Diocese of San Diego. 55-acre campus, 12, 13 buildings, $50 million project altogether. Just an incredible opportunity to work with the community there. These were tomato fields that my wife and I used to walk around before they started grading. We moved over 600,000 cubic yards of earth, and nothing came on and nothing left the site. It was all balanced on the site without any retaining walls, so very proud of that. Getting close to wrapping up, I just wanted to share with you some of the unbuilt. Studies for the Maritime Museum. You recognize where the location of this is, but you've never seen this because it was never built. But this is a replacement in one sense for some of the exhibits on board the Berkeley. And things that are fun but never get built. And this being another one. More recently, 2009, we did the Zoo Education Center. You recognize in the upper left-hand corner the Botanical Building. This is on the walkway that links the Balboa Park to the zoo, north and south past the village, Spanish Village and that. Never built. It was supposed to have been theoretically a net zero building, but it never got built. So, and then now and then a little rebellion now and then is a good thing. And I want to end with this. The rebellion is this, I'm sure this wasn't the only time it happened. And then Bill, I'm going to turn this over to you. I'll leave you with this image of Bob and Roy, but in early 1960s, when Robert was working up at UCSD, just beginning on campus, the master planning was being done for Muir College up there. And I mentioned to you about the controversy over the master plan done by Robert Alexander. There was a weekend getaway that was arranged. Robert was a part of it. The provost of Muir College was a part of it. The new chancellor was a part of it, and others in the administration. Long story short, it ended up Robert Alexander resigned. Robert Alexander resigned over that because his master plan was not going forward. The university was convinced it was too much, too over the top, and thankfully it did not get built in the way it was done. But that was a rebellion that Robert Mosher was pretty proud of, that he instigated, and had the campus architect. It wasn't so much replaced. Robert Alexander took it upon himself, but there were reasons that he resigned, and that's the rest of the story. So thank you very much.
Try it in the dark. Oh, that's... One of the other stories that Bob told over the years was on the Coronado Bridge, that was a little bit of a rebellion too, that Caltrans came in and was going to put in a standard trestle bridge from San Diego to Coronado. And he started complaining about it and wrote articles to the Union Tribune where they knew the Copleys. And pretty soon Caltrans came back and said, okay, smart guy, we're gonna hire you as a design consultant. And the result was not a trestle bridge as you see it. So I didn't work directly with Bob. He had retired before I joined the firm in '91, but Bob and Roy were both back for a number of years and continued to have influence and talk with us. And one of the things that struck me in our conversations was, and we pulled this quote up from what he had written, was part of the rebellion that he was objecting to was modern architecture, when they started, was tending towards that cold and brutal building for building's sake. And they said, no, we need to make it human. We need to make it warm and sensitive. And a lot of those principles follow through with what we do today. We've expanded on some of them. They're not necessarily just unique to us, but we try and use them to guide all of our projects as we're moving through. So that's what I'm going to talk about, is projects we've done more recently and some of those principles and how they stand up and stand the test of time. The first thing that in humanistic architecture is people and connecting with people. And not the, I remember images when we were in Italy of the stuff Mussolini built, and it was like cold, hard slabs, and it wasn't built for people. So we like to work on emphasizing how we work with people. It starts out with the community, looking at the big picture. How are people coming to the building? How do people move by the building? What's your perceptions of the building as you're working through the community and approaching a facility? Work on hierarchy of images. This is the Student Life Pavilion at University of San Diego. This is a foreground building that's what you see when you enter campus. And there are other buildings we've done, more background buildings. We don't emphasize those as much. You want the focal point and the emphasis to be on important buildings. How to get there. This is a huge thing, again, in approaching the building. Don't look at it as an edifice to itself, a piece of sculpture it may be, but people have to move in. You need to know how to get there, wayfinding, obvious entries, circulation through, and kind of broke my heart too, because I had done probably 15 projects on Aztec Center when they took it out. But a couple of things to note here that I'm proud of is the concrete that was there, the columns. Was working those about the same time as the Fine Arts Gallery up at Balboa Park. And if anybody goes to Panama 66, you can see some of the detailed concrete work. And they work through systems of how to get the concrete to show some aggregate. They were flame testing the concrete. Aggregate would pop and explode, so you'd see a little bit of texture to it rather than being all slick and smooth. Larry mentioned they worked with M.H. Goldman on this, and they went through to try and keep the budget down, working with M.H. Goldman, lots of different ways to form concrete to get the effect they wanted so they could do it effectively and cheaply and make it look cool, have a good texture to it. But circulation, access, approaching and coming through buildings is something that we emphasize often. Visibility, focal points. When you see a landmark element, you know that's a place to go. And that's what draws you in. We tend to follow those. And then going from the public space to semi-public, to semi-private, to private space, the transition as you're coming in, you know, the classic front porch from the street before you get into the house, those are things we watch as we're coming up. It's not just slam into, from public into private space. Recognize the difference between active and passive spaces. We're not always on show all the time, but we want to have a little bit of space to sit back and observe what's going on, see other spaces. This is out at Grossmont College at Griffin Center, and I always like to tell the administration out there that this is a quiet space where you could study or keep an eye on who's going on down below, almost voyeuristic. And interaction spaces. We do a lot of education work, and this is huge for getting people to connect. Give them spaces where it's not a definite program space, where they can hang out and chat, see each other, especially at a college where you're looking for places where students can interact with each other, with faculty, with staff, wide spots in the hallway. This is out at the Health and Sciences building at Grossmont College also. This started out as being a balcony. We built it into a lounge space so that they use it for lots of things now. But it's meant to be that space where students can get together, a sub-student center on the other side of campus. And exposing people to activities. Too often we walk by doors and we have no idea what's inside. We like to open spaces up so you get glimpses of what's going on inside. We used to have that with storefronts. You know, everybody had a glass storefront, you'd see what's inside. But now we like to do it with people too and get to see what's inside. Make it less intimidating to come in and see people and know what's going on. And of course, see and be seen space. This is what Gaslamp's all about, right? You're sitting outside fills up long before the insides do normally. And that's where you want to see people and be seen, hang out, meet friends. This is at University of San Diego. The building in the background is the Student Life Pavilion. This is redoing some of the front of the Hahn Center when we added on the bookstore, but it's a place that you can identify with. A place for you, a sense of, I'm here. And we want to, just like the prior slide at Aztec Center, I want to build that in, that sense of, I'm here. One of the other big legacies that's been handed forward is connecting with nature. In more recent years, we know this as biophilic design. And biophilic design has papers and studies and how-to guides to how you get better test scores when there's daylight, how having connection to the outside brings up visual interest, and a lot of these have been incorporated into the LEED requirements now. But the history goes back a long ways with the firm, and as you saw in some of the slides Larry was showing, that inside to outside, especially some of the early work with that approach coming up the stairs and the feeling like you're going through the garden. But biggest thing that we have to offer that people like is daylight. Everybody except the theater people who want to control everything. Everybody else likes to know, is it day or is it night? What's going on outside? And seeing the daylight. This is the administration building and student services at Grossmont College. Huge skylights light up that whole inner space. Again, visual connection to outside, views. This is up at Point Loma Nazarene University at the business school, where they have these just awful views looking out to the Pacific. So yeah, we want to capitalize on that wherever we can. Touching the other senses, feeling, a lot of textural things that we want to build into the buildings. And you saw some samples of that going way back, and I'll show you some more. Sound. Theater is a perfect place to talk about this because it's visual, it's sound, it's acoustics, how things work. And we like to incorporate the other sense that architects usually don't think of is smell. Courtyards where you have fragrant flowers, or picking up breezes that bring in the smells around you. On the downside, we usually try and shield that smell of the burger cooker spitting out smells that infest everybody, but something to pay attention to. This has also been another one that we emphasize, especially as much as we can. Space is at a premium. We don't want our buildings to just be little interior projects. We want to expand out. Use every square inch. We've built things on roofs, space between buildings become courtyards. This is the addition to the Brubeck Theater at Palomar College, where we needed some space between the buildings for code requirements. Well, we built that up to be a performance space, a place for students to hang out in between, a place for them to have their fundraisers. Being an open courtyard developed into a patio space with multiple uses to it. And again, that indoor-outdoor connection, so that, and we're seeing this a lot more lately with garage doors that roll up and inside goes to outside, especially in San Diego. It's wonderful. Other piece we like to emphasize is character of the space. We can do all these other things. If things are bland, you're not going to like it. This is a picture of the renovation of the athletic practice facility at University of California, Riverside. Cleaned it up, stripped it down. Looks like a basketball place, right? It is. But we like to have that attractive image for whoever the patrons are. This is inside the Torero bookstore at University of San Diego. So for that clientele, it needed to look high-tech. It needed to have multiple screens and activity and stuff going on. Lots of entry points. Students wanted it active, and you'd think of bookstores as something we don't do books much anymore, and we're seeing a lot of those shrink. This is active. They don't have many books in there anymore, but it's a lot of student services and retail for the students, as well as help and IT desk. I think we all need that. Character of the space is formed by forms, patterns, a couple other things, but trying to reflect the character of the space. This is for Aztec Shops out at San Diego State again. It's one of their coffee shops, as well as a grill, as well as a convenience store. But it feels active, feels exciting, using the fun forms and open spaces, lots of glass. Materiality is what architects have as their palette to work with. So trying to combine all those other things into what the materials feel like. Glass, texture, rough surfaces stay away. Honest use of all of those. Details and colors. We've seen a lot of buildings that look dated after a while because they've locked in colors. The emphasis colors, we like to make the accent colors so that they're more flexible. This is also out at the bookstore, or the Torero store at University of San Diego, and those purple confetti shapes on the top all have LED lights in them, so they can change it to change the mood, change the colors. Totally programmable. And the other thing we like to emphasize, sometimes this is hard to get some of our public clients to pay for, is architecture as art. This is at the Florence Ryford addition to the library in La Jolla. the textured glass wall that lets light into 3 levels, but it also translates and becomes the skylight rib down beyond. But looking for opportunities to build art into the building so that it's permanent. Joni Mosher presented us a sample of the gates that the artist did up at the Fine Arts Gallery in Balboa Park, which we all know now as Panama 66. But it's this wonderful sculpture that was, again, integration of art into the architecture. And then following up with that is places for art and art displayed in our buildings, so that it incorporates a lot of aspects of people, who we are, visual interest, trying to make them more interesting for people to be in, and not so much buildings as objects or buildings as icons to the architects. And I'll conclude with bringing the quote back up that Bob stated, I don't know how many years ago it was, I first saw it in the early 90s, but the human environment should reflect the warmth and the unique quality of the human spirit. To the degree that man can accomplish this aim, so will he expand his resources into a complex and contemporary world. That's what we consider humanistic design, and one of the major things that guides how we design in our office, and why the firm's been able to be around for 70 years and now have the opportunity to say 70 years, oldest continual architectural firm in San Diego. So that'll wrap it up, and if you have any questions for Larry and I, fire away. Go ahead.
Bill, one of the things that struck me the most there is the fact that you seem to have 2 modes of design. On the one hand, you've got the derived from mission architecture and Gill, and you've carried the rounded arches, all the way through wherever they're appropriate, and all the way up to the present day. And on the other hand, you have the radically modern designs that have changed over the years, but have basically kept pace with where contemporary design has been. Discuss that, how it is to have that kind of 2 modes running at the same time in the office.
And some of it goes even deeper than just 2 modes. University of San Diego is not mission, it's 16th century Spanish Renaissance. So you take the skill of form, light, scale, and spaces, and work with the palette that you're given. Some places like University of San Diego, you will design in this mode. So if we only wanted to do design work for them, we could stay in that mode. But there's a lot of other places that want more modern things, and we like to do more modern things too. But it's you adapt to the palette that you're given or that you're working with. Come on, somebody else has to have a question.
Can you talk a little bit about what is one of your most important future projects that you're working on?
We have a number of, let me reflect back on a quote that I recall coming from, correct me if I'm wrong, I want to say it was from Louis Kahn, and that's the most important project is the next one. In architecture as well as construction and engineering, we're always working on things. We finish our design work and then the project stays for a long time, but to keep a firm going, you got to be constantly going out and getting more work. So the most important one is the ones out there. We're currently working with a number of community colleges. We've got, as Larry said, another project going up at University of San Diego called Missions and Ministries. We just finished a studio project for theater and dance up at Miracosta College. Architects need to go with where the money is and who will pay the fees and commissions and who's building. So right now we're doing a lot of K-12 work. elementary schools and high schools, especially high schools. We've got like 4 or 5 of those going with San Diego Unified right now. Their direction is shifting a little bit. A few years ago, everybody wanted to go to college. Now we're focusing a little bit more on vocational stuff, and we're doing maker spaces and kind of, hands-on learning. And those are taking school architecture a little bit different direction than thinking of it as just classrooms. So those are some of the things that are currently on the boards. We also have some interesting things, a couple of them with the federal government for the military. Don't have these in hand yet, but they are hands-on training spaces for our troops to go out and simulated villages where they'll practice combat skills to hopefully reduce casualties and such. But work with the city where anybody up in La Jolla or at La Jolla Cove, we're going to be tearing down that nasty old comfort station that's there and putting up a very sleek, modern, elegant design. Elegant design is my term. So.
Is that the Jewish Center or?
No, it's right at the cove.
Right at the cove.
Where
The bridge facility is there.
Yeah,
Yes, it's right there. It's right adjacent to that. the
Yeah.
club.
Club or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah,
Those bathrooms are nasty.
I've noticed. I mean, I'll use just about anything, and I don't even like those.
They're nasty. Very nasty.
Can you talk a bit more about the feelings you have when your buildings are demolished, like San Diego State's Aztec Center?
Let's talk about that and how come there's not a vehicle to prevent the demolishment of that modern Egyptian entrance? I don't know how you characterize it.
But I was thinking more the more general thought that like Qualcomm Stadium, that just 2 years old, they want to throw that away, and these buildings can last a century, but somehow they don't. What do you make of that?
I guess I'm on here in that, yeah. I know it was a very emotional thing for Robert. You might well imagine that. And I want to get to your question, but I'm going to just a little bit of background on that. I've used a quote. Bill was talking about quotes here, and that I've used a quote too from Richard Meyer, whatever you may think about the work that Richard Meyer does. But it was a quote that he used at the time of the dedication of the Getty Center up in Los Angeles. And I've used this, and I've shared this with some people because it's a feeling that's very much how I feel, very personal to me. He says, as an architect, and particularly, I happen to mention the Cathedral Catholic School. I'm going to put this on, anyhow, I'll try to hold it. I had invested 10 years of my life with that project, and Robert, I'm sure, and Bill and others have invested equal amounts of time, if not longer. When it comes to that sort of involvement with a client, with consultants, with users, Richard Meyer associated that to a child. You give birth to a child, you raise that child, you care for that child, you provide for that child throughout a course of time. And for an architect, we can make a reasonable analogy saying that becomes a part of you after a while. And it's not just the bricks and the mortar, but it's the people that are there. And so when you turn that over to a user, for instance, it could be a school somewhere, and the children come and the teachers come and the parents come, you turn that over even as you would in a manner that, okay, now my child has graduated from high school, they're going on to other things. But they're still a part of me, but they've been a big part of me as I was nurturing them and they were being raised. And I don't want to get overly sentimental about that, but that's very much the way it is, and it's with some projects more than others, that you invest a lot of your time and effort and sometimes blood, sweat, and tears go into those things when things don't work out the way you hope they will, or sometimes they're not cared for in the way you hope they were. So I think there's a real investment, and I think I speak for other architects when I say that. It's not unlike raising a child and caring for that child. So when something happens to that child, when they're still relatively young, maybe before 50 years of age, they can't be declared historic, and it goes away, that's a very difficult thing, and you want to do what you can to preserve that. The other thing that comes to mind, it's another unbuilt project, and Bill and I both worked on this at various times in various ways. There was a project down at City College, not too far from here, A&T buildings, D buildings, that we never did. We invested a lot of money in that, worked with an associate architect, general contractor, And it never came about. But what it was, there were buildings that Frank Hope's office had done back, I think, in the late 1950s, early 1960s. And you might not consider it a great piece of architecture, but I have to tell you, the bones were good. The bones were good. And we looked at cutting out pieces of it, bringing in natural light, hybrid natural ventilation, and all the other things that go along with today's energy codes. It never got built, but it's a repurposing. So Roger, when you mentioned like the San Diego Stadium from 1967, which is now 51 years old, am I right on that? Yeah, 51 years old. The idea that people have said, there's lots of good bones there. Now it may not meet, all the luxury boxes that some of the owners and other people would want to see, but there's still a lot of good that comes out of that. So we're not going to get political on whether it's Soccer City or SDSU West. But the idea that's one of two buildings, by the way, that people may not know. That's one of two local San Diego buildings that received national AIA recognition. Do you want to guess the other one? The Salk. The Salk Institute was the other one. Those are the only two buildings in San Diego that received national AIA recognition. And to have that facility taken down is very, I would say it's difficult to understand. Part of it's economics, but there's other things like repurposing structures, and they can be done. And we've done that in the office. We've gone back to some of our own projects and repurposed things in that. So it's the idea that they can be used with many years to come. What we need to work with that in the future. I know Bob Mosher, the other thing is he had a very difficult time sometimes with private residences that people would come in. And I won't go through, there have been a number of not necessarily his homes, but homes that he thought were definitely worth saving that people tore to the ground and replaced, and they're gone. That happened to that Irving Gill. There's a number of things that we've lost from Irving Gill and others around the community that we think really were worth saving and just were not able to save. People did not, a lot of it has to do with economics, but there's other factors as well.
I might add a little bit to that. The specific question was about Aztec Center going down, and like I said, I did a number of projects, additions, renovations, and we worked hard to try and meet the needs of the growing population, including studying, taking over one of the next buildings to put some of the student offices in to try and keep the building, and university saw it differently. And the building was all cast concrete, so it didn't allow flexibility for adding on to, and it was seismically, brittly stiff. There's a whole litany of technical reasons, but they asked us to help study how we could do it, and came up with some solutions, and it just didn't work for them. So that was a heartbreaker to see Aztec Center go away. Larry touched on something else that I'd like to chime in on for a couple seconds. Is one of the things that we're doing a lot of our projects are repurposing. We like to call it re-imaging, repurposing, renovating, and remodeling. Because we go in and give it a fresh spirit. The buildings that were built 40, 50, even 30 years ago, we live in another world now. Buildings that couldn't accommodate the internet. Imagine where that's at. Yeah, everything's got to be modernized and upgraded. So we do a lot of that as well as giving them a new image.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking of Horton Plaza. Do you have any ideas of what you would like to see there?
Well, one of the big things we'd love to see is it being our project. And remember when Horton Plaza came in, it was like revolutionary at the time. It was way over the top, exciting. There's, I think as Larry was saying, lots of good bones. There's good bones there, but circulation system was always confusing. How do I get from here to there? And I think if they clean some of that up and still keep the open courtyards for people spaces, upstairs can do what they need to, but I like to think, keep it for people spaces, make it fun and exciting in there again. I think Gaslamp has taken over with lots of sidewalk cafes and see and be seen spaces. Horton Plaza should be able to recapture some of that, especially with office workers up above.
I'm not sure if any of this, I don't want any of it to be published, so I know Roger's been madly typing away back, so I'm not sure if we're gonna see something in the paper the next few days, but in response to your question, this is just a personal observation, and I tend to like what I've heard about what they're talking about there. They're gonna keep some measure of retail, which I think is very important, very reasonable, but the idea of converting that into these open office spaces, I think, has real potential, and I say that for a couple of reasons. Number one, when you consider all the housing that's going downtown, I wish a lot of it was more affordable, honestly. I wish a lot of it was more affordable, but I think also when you consider that this flow of traffic, people come downtown and then leave downtown, as opposed to keeping people in these communities, whether it's East Village where we are, whether it's more downtown in the urban core, wherever that may be. I think the idea of trying to create live workspaces, entertain, restaurants, whatever, I think has a lot going for it if we can find a measure that the people who work in these spaces can also afford to live here and not have to drive cars and park cars and do all the rest of that back and forth. So, but I wanted to share one thing, as long as I have just a brief platform here. Catherine, you had mentioned something to me earlier, and I want to say and I've stepped aside from the firm, it's been a little over 5 years ago, and I just wanted to share with you that are here, I cannot imagine working for two more fine gentlemen, four of them, because we didn't talk much about William Watson and William Ferguson, who my wife and I continue to get together with. Bill is now 88 years old, and that he was the youngest of the four. And Roy was 13, Watson was 15, and Mosher was 20, in terms of the years they were born. But I cannot imagine working with a finer group of individuals throughout the course of my career, and what I was given the privilege of working with them. People use that term, what was it, Isaac Newton, standing on the shoulders of giants? There's no question in my mind, we were given that privilege. Bill, I include Bill in that as well, standing on the shoulders of people that did some amazing things in the community of San Diego, and I feel very, very privileged to say that. And then one last brief comment. You were talking about relationships. And I've told people, if there's anything that comes out of this, it's not the fact that I drive around pointing out we did that, we did this, we did that. But I had lunch as recently as 3 days ago with a former related client, former teacher, school board member in Coronado, that I've had a relationship with now for 25, 30 years. Some people have passed away, some are still here. But the relationships that architects, the privilege of meeting people in the most widely scattered sometimes, whether it's military, healthcare, education, retail, housing, you name it, whatever it is, architects are really privileged to work in all of these areas and be exposed to these ideas that are coming up. And when I go back and read papers that Robert has written about his involvement with the University of California, San Diego, the early stages, and what his thoughts were about working with the people up there on the applied physics and mathematics buildings and the administration, and et cetera, the wide-ranging people, and the work we've done in Coronado between mayors and superintendents and city council members and board members and citizens, it's absolutely incredible. And that, to me, has been the greatest privilege I've had of working as an architect. It's the relationships that some of them still exist to this day, and I will always be grateful for that. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks to your appearance today. We want to give you both these two books. You have to argue over who gets which, but there they are. And thanks again for this enlightening discussion. And I want to remind you all that the next event will be on October 20th, when Ken Bissell and Juliana Maxime from the University of San Diego will talk about their book they're doing on housing. So, any further questions? Come up and talk to the two guys from Mosher Drew, and thanks for coming today.
Thank you. Thanks for the book.
Well,
Thank you.